Hey everyone. Okay, welcome back to Ableton Lesson 3. For this lesson, I will dive deeper into the tools, instruments, and plugins of Ableton and continue with some production techniques we covered in the last session in more depth. So the idea is to move on from basic setup and clicking around in the previous lessons into more knowledge of plugins, functions, and operations, so you can begin to understand the concepts more and therefore be more creative and intentional with their use. Basic concepts of synthesis will be covered a bit, but I will do an in-depth lesson on synthesis as its own video soon. So let's begin a walkthrough of Ableton's instruments and describe each one, beginning with the top instruments over here. Go to the top one, analog, and let's open it on the channel here and take a look at it. So again, remember, you can have the info view over here that's going to explain everything for you itself. And remember, you have the track armed here and the keyboard turned on, or our MIDI keyboard in use so we can play the synthesizer. There we go. And yeah, let's go through basic functions of what this is. Analog. If you guessed it, this is a virtual analog synthesizer. That means that it replicates some of the characteristics found in analog synthesis and waveforms. Essentially, if you remember back to first lesson talking about the difference between digital, well, I briefly mentioned, in the choosing your sampler rate, your 44,100 sample rate, and that's the number of audio samples per second that is making up the waveform. Remember, I said it's kind of like pixels in an image, in a digital image, whereas the analog waveform is an actual it's actual electricity, an actual electrical wave being generated, kind of like a pen or pencil or paintbrush is drawing an actual physical line, and the digital equivalent of that is that sound waveform being made up out of lots of tiny little steps, kind of like, pixels basically, to make the digital equivalent of it. So an analog waveform, of course, has some unique characteristics in that sense that is different than digital. The fact that you're using a real live electrical signal has its own inherent kind of quirks and characteristics that are often described as being, sounding warmer or having unique character and that sort of thing, because digital is just calculations, it's all bits and ones and zeros, etc. So it's very precise and accurate. In no way is digital inferior to analog or, vice versa or anything. It's just describing some of the different characteristics that are thought of when it's designing things like analog modeling synthesizers. So in the analog synth, what do we have here in the GUI? Starting in the top left corner of it here, we have oscillator 1, which you can turn on and off with this click button function. You have the level adjustment. Again, you can see everything in the info view here, but I'm just going to go through what this is. I have the level view for it here. This is the ratio of, this is which filter it's being sent to, or the ratio of the filter that it's being sent to. Something you can, different things you could experiment with. This is the shape of the waveform. It's where you select either a sine wave, saw wave, square, or noise. And then the octave select here, where you can move it up or down an octave, and you can hear that if you separate the octaves. You can hear that it's playing separately from oscillator 2. You turn those on or off. So you're mixing two oscillators here. That's a very common thing in synthesis, is mixing two waveforms together to get unique characteristics. So with your octaves adjusted there, this is octave adjusting in 12 steps. Semi is adjusting in individual steps. You can see that. Again, if you click the little triangle at the top next to these things, the little triangle is going to be the reset to 0 position, or again, with that single click Ableton convention, single click and then type something and hit 0, or type something and hit enter, you can set those values manually. And then detune. So we're going from large octave 12 steps, or, large adjustment 12 steps at an octave, single steps in semi, and then detune of individual frequencies. You can do a finer adjustment of that. That's what detune is. Again, we're going to cover a lot of these repeating themes that you're going to see in the instruments, like, for example, all these basic features that you're going to see across all the different instruments, because they're just common parts of synthesizers. So over here is the filter section, and if you notice, if you click the oscillator section, it highlights, or if you click on the filter section, then it shows the filter section here. This is where you're adjusting your filter type here that you can select here from different filter types. Here you've got the formant filter. Formant does modeling of vocal sounds. High pass, notch, band pass, low pass, etc. Standard filter types. And you can adjust that. And then this, says over here, selects how much of the output will be routed to filter 2. So that means that you're having this filter carrying over to filter 2 as well. It means that you could separate them and set it as 0 and have an independent filter over here, but stick with this for now. This is setting the frequency of the filter. Turning the filter down. Setting the frequency of the filter and the resonance. The resonance is the, it's like the angle of the filter. It is the angle of where the filter drops off, and if you increase the resonance up to a higher value, it gives it this spike, which, I can show you if you're not familiar with that by opening up auto filter here and showing you this is, the frequency, and then the resonance amount is that angle of the slope of the filter, that if you increase, it gives it this peak, which will be increasing the frequencies in that area and gives it a distinct sound, etc. And so that is the resonance control here. If you turn it up, a lot of filters are self-oscillating, meaning if you turn up the resonance to a high or full amount, it will produce a tone that can produce lots of feedback, also producing interesting overtones, etc. You hear that high sound there. And that happening. Just notice my synth levels are a little bit low, not super low, but let's turn that up with, well, say the amp, in the next section over here. You have the amp and the panning, left or right. Again, double click. Oh, you can also double click just to reset things generally, or click that little triangle in the middle. And then the level of the amp, of the output. Amp, like amplifier, that's amplifying the signal, so you can adjust that here. Make it a bit louder. Also type in a value. I really like the typing convention in Ableton. It's a very quick and accurate way to adjust things. Okay, and then moving on, next we have the LFO section, the low frequency oscillator, which are, oscillators just like the sound oscillators we're getting the sound from, where, a sound wave is actually a wave that is, it's actually more of a circle oscillation, but it's shown as a wave going up and down like this, because it also travels in that wave. And, drawing a circle doesn't really show, much for a sound wave. But that's actually a sound wave that is oscillating or spinning fast enough that it produces audio. And you can see that with an LFO here. If you using an LFO and adjust its rate. Well, we're going to set it to the rate you can see down here in hertz. And if you increase that, you can see the sound wave, the wave of the LFO over here increasing. Goes up to 17 hertz on this synthesizer. That's not something that you'll be able to hear, but generally speaking, many LFOs can be set to what's called audio rate, where they go up to a high enough frequency that they become audible themselves. But the LFO, the low frequency oscillator, implies a low frequency, such as, these fractions of frequencies or very low frequency amounts we're getting, which are then slowly moving signs that can be assigned to change different parameters of the synthesizer as like an automation, essentially. So you can also set it to notes here, to a grid division of the BPM, like a 4, 2, 1 bar, half bar, quarter, eighth, 16th, etc. If you want it to be synced to the tempo of your project. And then over here, you've got the master output and routing section. This is where you can do things like turn the vibrato on and off in the synth. Vibrato is essentially it's like it's like an LFO that is dedicated to the volume output of something. So if you have signal playing and you turn vibrato up, and that's used to give something a slight movement feel, kind of an organic feel generally. Over here you have a unison mode where you can use the amount of voices a synth is outputting. If you hear it now, it sounds like, especially with the one oscillator, it's just a single output. If we turn in unison, we have 2 voices, or in this option 4. That means that we're getting 4 voices output from this oscillator, or more if we turn on the second oscillator as well, which you can see increase the volume a lot. Glide. Glide is a slip, a slide between notes. When you are triggering multiple notes and you go from one note, you can hear it there. You can hear that kind of sound, slide. The glissando, legato is, here it says gliding will only occur if the second note is played before the first note. That means if you're the legato is a musical term that basically translates to like smooth movement, playing the notes smoothly from one to the next. So down here, you've got second LFO, which can be assigned to a different location. And then, as you notice, I've been kind of skipping by the stuff in the middle here as we repeat down here with all the same options in the second oscillator. As you select the different parts of the synthesizer, the GUI in the middle changes, showing you what you are adjusting. If we have the oscillator selected, this over here in the middle is also, this is a noise source oscillator. You can turn that on, and your noise being played. Adjust the frequency of the noise, kind of the sound, of the noise. A noise oscillator is, often used, say, if you are giving the noise like a very short crack of noise in, say, creating percussion sound, where with the hit of the drum you get that initial kind of burst of noise. Or just adding a noisy kind of, crackly undertone to synthesizer sound, etc. Those are some examples of where you might use a noise oscillator in a synth. as you may be wondering, why would I want this noisy, oscillator mixed in my sound? Those are some examples of where you might use it. So with one of the oscillators open, we can see we have the pitch envelope. So an envelope is an adjustment of a parameter that triggers when the note is played. So here you can see as we change this up and down, the pitch envelope changes, and pitch envelope. So it's an envelope that is changing the pitch of the sound, and we can adjust its timing here. Like so. Again, double click to reset things to its default value. And then here are some options where you can set the pitch modulation, the modulation of that pitch to an LFO, to LFO1. We can change that. We can turn that up. And as you hear, that LFO rate then affecting that. Yeah, so that's setting the LFO1 to do that. This is changing the pulse width. Now the pulse width is a parameter of square waves. These ones, the square waves, and the width between those square waves, between the positive and negative crossing of zero of the sound wave there, is referred to as the width here, and you can change that with you can hear that changes the sound of the square wave quite a bit, and you can also turn the LFO on that, and then of course so sub sync mode sub level. This is a sub oscillator, and you can set the level of that. That sounds nice, Yeah, so you can hear this sub oscillator, sub bass, like sub bass frequencies. Sub oscillator refers to a independent oscillator that is included in synthesizers generally without a lot of the separate features like the main oscillators, but it acts as an oscillator that is default set to, -1 octave or something from the main oscillators here, as you can hear there. And sync, this is changing sub enables sub oscillator, tuned 1 octave below the main oscillator. Sync restarts the main oscillator's waveform according to the phase of an additional internal oscillator. So this is dealing, sync mode is syncing or re-syncing the oscillation of the oscillators with the adjustment here. As you can hear there. Okay, so then moving to the filter section, you have the shape of the envelope of the filter. This is, again, the envelope, the thing that is being triggered to cause a function to happen when the note is being triggered. You can see the adjustments here of the attack, decay, the ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release. Again, brief recap of that. Attack being the initial attack, the initial triggering of the sound. The decay being, as you can see, the movement of this shapes over here. Decay, the decay of that effect being carried out in time. And the sustain is the level of the effect dropping or not at zero. The effect happens in the envelope here. The effect of the envelope happens and then carries on straight at the same level, or decreasing the sustain from 1 down from 1 gives an initial spike of the attack, a spike of level of the attack of the envelope, and then dropping the level after that with the according decay. And yeah, basic envelope a function. There you can see it is kind of set, if we have it set like this as a sharp spike and then down to nothing, we get a very quick. Let's turn these LFOs off. We get a quick spike in an envelope level, which is, in this case, we're in the filter section. This is triggering the filter, the envelope of the filter, and as we turn the filter down, you can hear it. So we're starting at this low frequency of the filter and then giving it this quick spike envelope, turning the filter up. So essentially, like we are taking the frequency of it and going like this, real quick, you know. And then the adjustment amount of that is found in let's see, frequency mode. You can have it set to LFO. What is this? A type of saturation. This is a saturation being applied to the filter. Filters will often have a drive amount or a saturation amount, or a some sort of wave shaping amount you can apply to it. Here is adjustment of attack time, velocity, and envelope. How much the envelope affects the velocity of the keys. These are just different adjustments for that. And changing the slope of the filter for linear or exponential, the curve or linear, straight. The sustain time decreasing. Yeah, this is sustain time of the filter. Another adjustment for that. And the release of it, and whether or not you can loop. You can often loop like an envelope, so it will repeat like that. Same for the resonance and the resonance of the filter in this part, you know. And then, yeah, same concept for the amp. This is what's referred to as amplitude of the sound, where you have the same concept of an envelope adjusting the amplitude of the sound, in other words, the volume of the sound, where you can change that. You open up the filter or turn the filter off and you just hear the raw sound without a filter. But then if you say turn this way down, and again adjusted that decay, you know, you can hear very clearly what the envelope is doing, adjusting the attack. You hear how as that attack gets longer, the sound takes longer to fade in, essentially. Yeah. Over here with your LFOs, you have parameters of the LFOs. You can change the wave of the LFO, the waveform, and it gives you a visual of what that looks like. Retrigger essentially means you're retriggering the LFO every time a note is pressed. If you have that turned on, the LFO will be triggered every time you press a key, press a note. With it off, the LFO just runs in succession at the rate it's set to. This is a noise waveform right here. Noise also means random, as you can see, like the steps here, as opposed to, let's see, square wave or rectangular. Square wave, you can see it's always the same, up and down. Noise wave is random. We have another, this is an unstepped noise wave. And you can set the offset of that. This is like offsetting the start. If the wave starts at a certain point at 0 every time it's begins or triggered, you can change the offset by degrees. You know, you can see as that moves the waveform here like this, you can just change the offset of it and also the delay or the attack of the LFO itself. So, all right, and then to the master output section here, the volume section, we've got a routing scheme with each oscillator feeding into its own filter and subsequent, reading from here, and its amplifier. You can change how the sound is routed. You don't need to go into that right now. You can just click around and experiment with that. Because the way that oscillators are routed through a synthesizer, say the way this is, oscillator into a filter, into an amplifier with an LFO to modulate it, and then the master output is coming out here. That's really common, but you can also change that a bit. And obviously you get very different results the way the synthesizer is routed. Say if you were going from the oscillator to an amp and then to a filter, as opposed to the filter first and then into an amp, it'll just change, what the results are. These are adjustments when it says global here. This is the global parameters, or the MPE, the routings of, well, you can select how things are routed individually here by changing something like LFO1 rate and the pressure of it, MPE pressure. What is MPE? Oh, this is dealing with aftertouch in your keyboard. Aftertouch is where it's a feature some keyboards have where you can press a key and then keep pressing on it, and it will create an effect. After the key is pressed, you can press up and down to create further effects of it. You don't really have to worry about that at this point. Global, these are adjustments for some of the keyboard. The number of voices, you can choose how many voices are available. You can set it all the way up to having 32 voices available in the synth, or mono, just one. Again, with unison voices, you can change how many voices are used in the unison. Unison as in they're in sound waves that are in unison. They're all playing at the same time. Okay, well, that basically covers going through all the features of this analog synth. That was a little more in depth because as we move on to the next synthesizer, you're going to find a lot of similar features. So let's go to Collision and open that up. Collision is a little different. Collision is a synthesizer that is replicating striking physical objects like a xylophone or marimba type thing. You can clearly hear. You can hear that modeling happening there. And you can change the modeling that's done. Marimba, string, membrane. Collision, like colliding with physical things like a plate, striking a metal plate with something, or a pipe, or a tube. These are all FM synthesis algorithms. FM meaning frequency modulation, describing the interaction of the frequencies of two sound waves together. And in certain combinations, they can create these very interesting and complex sounds like this. And this is just a synthesizer with those algorithms preloaded in it that allows you to play around with experimenting, finding different models of physical, what's called physical modeling synthesis is one synthesis method. And you see similar things here. This is called a resonator because that's what that is called, is resonating, or a resonator, where you have essentially multiple sound waves being combined together in different frequencies to create this very rich resonation of sound here that you hear. That's obviously you can hear this is clearly more than just one sound wave mixed together to create that sound. And here you've got resonator 2 you can turn on or off. That's just like your oscillator 1 or 2 in, a synthesizer. And again, the decay of the sound when it's physical modeling synth is called dampening. Okay, I'm going into synthesis stuff a bit detailed here, but we're going to do a whole lesson on that in the future, like I said. So to gloss over it a bit more, adjustment for the material amount, and you can move this around inside the box here. Move this around to change the sound a lot. But you will hear quite clearly. This is output of the mallet section. You can adjusting the volume, like it says, noise amount, like a noise oscillator we talked about before. An LFO section, again, where you can turn LFOs on, adjust their rate and the amount the LFO is being applied to the destination here, no destination, or this destination. You can set the destination and the amount that's being applied here to something. And then the amount of that LFO overall being sent to that amount. So generally you'll have two levels of adjustments in a modulation source like this. You can say, I want you to 100% adjust the volume there, but then in this, you can say only use about 30% of that capability though, or more. Yeah, MIDI setup where you can route things to a MIDI keyboard specifically. I'm not going to go into that. But yeah, you can see basic functions like the tuning, the fine-tuning, the pitch envelope we talked about before, and the time of the pitch envelope. These are the same concepts from the previous synthesizer we talked about, just in slightly different form, where this doesn't have an envelope you can adjust, it just has the time of the pitch envelope you can set here. The overall gain of the output of the resonator. See, as we turn it up, it gets louder. Number of voice select here, and more voices being triggered. And the output volume, yeah. Or the structure, this is how the sounds are routed together. You can change that either 1 plus 2 or 1 over 2, 1 being routed through 2. Yeah, so similar features in different packages and different synthesizers. Moving on to, let's try this drift one. Again, you see it's a very similar looking synthesizer. I think drift is a new synthesizer in Ableton 12, I think. I haven't used it much. I'm not sure exactly what algorithm it's focusing on, synthesis model it's focusing on, but you can see similar features here again. Oscillator 1, oscillator 2, level adjustment for octave. This one's set at octave -1 as like a sub oscillator. You can hear that in there. Again, filter with the envelope that's being applied to it, the envelope shape here. Volume output. Envelope 1, envelope 2, selecting back and forth, or selecting them just like that by clicking on them. Yeah, you're seeing common themes here. The filter, so the oscillator, the filter, the envelopes that are preset to adjust the filter, the LFO here, and the modulation. LFO is a source of modulation, but modulation is often listed as a separate thing where you can change things like, say, the velocity of the key press to a destination, the velocity changing the low pass resonance amount or something, and how much you want that to affect it. The mod wheel of your synthesizer, or the mod wheel of your MIDI keyboard being sent to adjust the, the whatever, and then changing how much it does that. Sound mode, poly, meaning multiple sounds, or mono, only one sound happening together. Stereo is using 2 voices per note, split to left and right, or unison, where unison is using voices together again, and as it says here in the info, you can slightly detune or change the different voices to get really interesting, rich combinations by having multiple voices playing in unison together and setting them slightly differently. Yeah, and the output volume, the amount that velocity triggers volume, transposing overall, sound overall by number of steps. Yeah, and pitch bend. Pitch bend is a thing you can use with the pitch bend wheel on your MIDI keyboard, and the range you can set here. So there you go. Out here you have a mixer for the oscillators where you can just adjust how those are mixed together. And yeah, you're seeing similar things here in the instruments. Again, a lot of these things down here, quite similar. Meld, operator, wavetable, tension. These are different synthesizers that do different things, but all use the same basic kind of parameters like we're talking about. But we're doing on time here, 36 minutes. Okay, let's go to the next one on the list is a drum rack. And if you open this up, you'll see a blank, empty drum rack where you can put things into this drum rack, into this, and just have it in this format of drum pads that you can trigger or play with like a MIDI pad controller, like MPC style, finger drumming, etc., that kind of thing. And you can put stuff in those pads, like as you select, you could put a synthesizer in there and then trigger that on that drum pad, or put a sample. Let's go to samples and just whatever, just put a sample there, and then that sample is being triggered on that drum pad. So you see how you could build up a drum kit that then you could, of all sorts of different sounds that you could play on these different drum pads. It's just another way to have an instrument laid out where you could play these. Get rid of that one so it doesn't move infinitely. But it's another way to have an instrument laid out. Now, of course, like most drum instruments, if you open the drum rack and you see like, okay, we can load this 909 kit. They have the different drum sounds laid out to trigger individually, like a drum machine, like a typical drum machine. But the drum rack just itself is an open canvas to be creative with things. You could have, say, a sample sliced up into little parts and laid out over all of these drum pads, and then you can play around with triggering them in different ways. And you see our range here, C1, C, C sharp, D, etc., all the way up. And then over here on the left, we can go, this is our octave control, up and down an octave. So we can have this whole stack loaded with different samples in different places. And again, playing the keyboard, you can see which ones you're triggering with these yellow flashes here, and adjusting that with the Z and X keys on your keyboard to adjust the octave. Yeah, and so, okay, again, opening a drum kit, a drum preset kit, like this 909 kit. You can see we have these preset adjustments of it. Over here we have these snapshots created by Ableton where these are preset sounds where we can choose lo-fi, hot, lo-fi, boomy, different. These are, and you can see the knobs changing as you select different ones. This is a preset drum kit that has a bunch of parameters already mapped to these knobs that you can change, such as the gain, glue, the glue compressor amount, the drive of the amp amount, the low gain, the mid, the high, vintage, whatever that is. These are preset parameters in the drum kit, and you can open up these racks and see different parts of them by triggering these different buttons here. Like this one says show hide device over here. This opens up the device. You can see that, well, it says multi-sample mode because it's triggering multiple samples. But this is the sampler here that is loaded with this sample that is triggering, that it has this snare drum sound that we're triggering. And it has a bunch of preset parameters to it. Oops, wrong instrument. Yeah, it's set up in a very easy and intuitive way to play around with these knobs. And to get into that, the basic way this functions is, let's delete this and open an instrument. Let's open the operator synth here. Select the operator synth so that it's highlighted at blue, in blue here up at the top, and then hit Control G, or now you could also right click and hit group to group it. Now you see that it's inside of this instrument rack, as it's called, and it has these different buttons on the side we can use to open and close those things, just like that. You can see how that drum kit was built. So there's this round knob button here at the top. This opens knobs, macro adjustment knobs on the side, and then you can take any parameter in the synthesizer, anything you want really, and select it, and then right click on it and hit map to macro 1, 2, 3, etc. You can map it to any of the macros there. Let's map the frequency of the filter to macro 1. And you see now it pops up over here. And then you have adjustment of that parameter via that macro knob. And you can do that for pretty much anything. You can right click, route it to a macro, and adjust it over here. So that is an easy way to set things up to kind of building your own custom instruments and things for you to play around with. When you have that, you can also right click and hit rename, or again, Control R for renaming, and call it something different, like, built something. You can change what these are called, that way too. You could also change the color of it too. Yeah, you can make these all colorful and different to create your own custom little instrument setups with that. So that's an instrument rack. You can see here, it says instrument rack. You can rename that too. Control R and type in, whatever. And then you can save it over here. There's a little save preset icon. You click that, it'll pop up here in your user library, and you can save it as whatever you want. And then once you have it saved, you can open it, and it will be there exactly what you created. So yeah. So this instrument rack, you can also put audio effects in it. You can add things to it in behind the synthesizer here. You notice if I open an effect, if I just double click to open it, it opens it, but it's over here separate from this instrument rack. Now if I click and drag the effect right over here where there's this line behind the synthesizer, you can see You can see if you try to put it in the front, it'll say here on the bottom, insert audio effects after instruments. Right over here, this blue line highlights right here, and drop it there. And now you see it's connected to this instrument, and it's all part of the same instrument rack. If you double click, it'll open and close racks. And now that is part of that instrument rack. Put a EQ after it, you know, etc. And then you're getting into building your own instrument racks. Again, remember you can change things like, you know, want the dry, wet, the amount of this amp on its own knob over here, and then you can roll it, you know, amp, make it color, you know, and then you have control of that here. Yeah. So that's building custom instrument racks, getting into that. That also makes it very easy to automate things too, because of course, once you have something set to a knob like this, you can right-click, show automation, and this is sending me to the automation in the arrangement view here, because there's nothing in the clip view. If we had a clip created here in the clip view, and then went to automate that, oh, it's still showing arrangement view, but you can do automations in clips or in the arrangement view. It's something we can dive into more, but I think if I trigger this clip, it'll probably do that then. Let's see, automation, yeah. So with the clip playing in clip view, clip session mode, and you want the automation, you select the automation for that source, you know, right click, show automation, then it'll show you in the clip, and you can adjust the automation of it. And of course, that's, you know, something you can change in the clip, or in the arrangement view, like we talked about, you know, before. But having those knobs set up makes it really easy to automate things, control things. That's also how you control things with a MIDI controller. You have a controller with knobs on it, or sliders, or any kind of control interface, and you can map these knobs to your controller very easily with this MIDI function up here. I don't have a MIDI controller hooked up right now, but you can just hit MIDI. Basically, it's pretty simple to do. You, up here in the corner, top right, you hit the MIDI button, everything goes like this, and then you select whatever you want to map to your MIDI controller. As you can see, that can be, you know, pretty much anything. You can select that knob with a single click, and then move the knob or the part of your MIDI controller you want to be mapped to it, and you will see it react and be mapped to that. And then when you're done, click MIDI again to move out of that, and then you will be able to adjust that with the control you just linked to it. So, as you can see, that's getting into more in-depth and very Ableton-specific ways to work with instruments, set them up into being very fun, playable arrangements like this, and then save them. Again, save button over here. Save them in your user library for things to use in the future. So again, that's called an instrument rack. It's found in instruments. You have an instrument rack here. And the same can be done with effects racks in the audio effects category. You have audio effect rack, and you can do the same thing with audio effects. You put them into this rack here, and then you have the same thing happening just in a rack for audio effects, meaning you can't put an instrument into the audio effects rack. That has to be an instrument rack, of course. But if you didn't guess, you could put an audio effects rack into an instrument rack. And then you have an instrument rack which has its own knobs. As you can see, you can map things to, knobs here. You can map things to knobs here inside the audio effect rack. And then you have different racks of control, and you can map those things to as many MIDI controls as you have, and save it all in big instrument racks. So that's something very fun to do. It's also very useful for things you find yourself repeating a lot, like say if you have a sampler, for example. Let's use that as an example. If you open sampler or simpler is like a simpler version of sampler. You could have the sampler and grouped with knobs, and say a really common use with sampler is to take multiple samples and let's just select a couple different random samples, click and click, hold shift, click, click, hold shift to select multiple ones, and then click and drag them over to samples here. Now you see 8 of 8 samples are selected. In the sampler, the zone, open up the zone, and you see all your samples here. And as you click on them individually, you see the different samples. And over here, you have methods for selecting them. You can select them by key of the keyboard, by velocity of the keyboard press, or by select. And so, say a really common thing to do for multi-sampling is having a bunch of samples, selecting them all like this, and then in select with the blue bars, you right click and hit distribute ranges equally, and then you can slide through your sample selection with this bar up here at the top and select different samples. And then with that bar, you can right click and map to macro 1, and then you have this knob selecting, to sweep through those different sample selections. That's an example of a common thing to do with the sampler. Loaded with multiple samples. You could have a bunch of different samples you're using loaded up like that, and then, pull the rack something and save it. Boom. Yeah, so creating racks for things that you find yourself using more than once or using in the future, or if you create some big cool instrument, a bunch of stuff together, you save it for future use and future editing. Yeah, that's going into more detail with the instruments in Ableton, the synthesizer models, the sampler, and creating racks with those instruments, mapping things to knobs for changing them and for modulation, and then automating those by using automation, changing that, and yeah, and then saving them for future use so that you can build a cool instrument or cool sound and say, I really like this, and save it for future use. Yeah, so that's going a bit more into depth with those concepts and ideas. I know we didn't cover every instrument here, but that stuff we'll get to more in the future. Each different synthesizer has its different characteristics, like the wavetable synth using wavetables, which is a table, like a flat surface of a sound wave spread over a horizontal surface that you can sweep through with this control that changes the wave. You can select here, and you can see as you sweep through this wave table, you get really different sounds. Yeah, but again, all the similar functions we talked about, sub-oscillator, oscillator 2, filter, frequency, filter resonance, modulation sources of the amplitude modulation, the envelopes that can be routed to different places. This one has a matrix routing system where you adjust what is, what the amplitude, envelope, LFO, and what they're adjusting. This is this way of routing those things. You can route, the LFO or the amp to these different sources by adjusting it here. Again, similar, they're all the same concepts, just in different kind of formats. We have our unison over here again, our poly or mono select here, number of voices, select the output volume. Again, all those things we covered just in the different synthesizer outlook, different synthesizer format. See, here we've got tension. This is a string modeling synth that has dampening, position, stiffness, the model, bow, hammer, plectrum, similar to that. That's another physical modeling synth, like the collision, like this collision one was, physical modeling. But for strings, tension on a string, get it, yeah. So you see there are a lot of similar functions in these different synths that if you familiarize yourself with what these basic concepts are, you can navigate a synthesizer and see what these are. The operator synth, for example, has these 1, 2, 3, 4 voices here stacked together that you can turn on and off and adjust the level. And by selecting each voice, you're selecting also the wave, sound wave over here, sine, square, etc. But yeah, similar setup though. Got the oscillators, the envelope for the oscillator, the LFO, and the destination for the LFO, the characteristics of the envelope triggering the LFO, the filter, the envelope for the filter, and the filter view itself, the pitch envelope, the amp, and routing. Again, all the similar things, the same basic ingredients of a synthesizer, just in a different package and different look. And we'll go more into depth with that stuff in the future, as we get into sound design and advanced synthesis. But to start out with, we're just getting deeper into these instruments and basic things that we, just loaded onto a track and played around with before, but now we get into clicking into them and understanding a bit more of what we're doing, what we're changing. Again, that function of being able to group, right click or Control D, Control G to group a synthesizer, route stuff to the map stuff to the knobs, use those, change sounds. Yeah, that is getting into the next step. After, we've discussed creating the MIDI clips and doing basic arrangements in the arrangement view. Now you can start getting a bit more into depth with the instruments you're playing with and what you're doing, and the audio effects you're adding to them. Now the audio effects generally are things you could look up online to find out more detail about, like what is an overdrive effect or a looper or a gate or these other things. But yeah, also just playing around with them and figuring out what they are. Remember, they all have similar controls, like the drive amount, the dry wet amount of the effect, how much the effect is being applied. Here, dry wet, how much it's being applied, reverb amount, etc. The controls are all pretty similar in terms of effects. You'll have like the amount, the feedback amount, the drive amount, etc. And you can just experiment with those and different combinations to get more familiar with what they are. Effects and things is definitely another topic we can go in depth with in the future about more advanced use and specific use of effects. And yeah, that's kind of a good overview of getting deeper into the tools and instruments in Ableton. Can carry on a little bit more. Yeah, MIDI effects. MIDI effects go before a instrument, as it will remind you if you try to put them afterwards. It'll say insert MIDI effects before instruments down there at the warning bar on the bottom. So MIDI effects go before an instrument, and that are things. So MIDI effects are effects that can, shape a MIDI instrument, like an arpeggiator or a preset scale, or a randomizer or chord function, that sort of thing. Yeah, more things to play with. Again, remember, info view over here is your friend. It'll tell you all this stuff like, what is a gate on an arpeggiator? Well, it sets the length of the notes, blah, blah, you can see over here. That explains what things are for you. Yeah, MIDI effects go before an instrument and change the output, or change the playing of the MIDI instrument. Audio effects go afterwards and affect the output, the sound. And yeah, there are a few more sections things we'll go into in the future here. But for now, have fun playing around with that and getting deeper into instruments and effects in Ableton. And I suggest you play around with the stuff we've covered today, like creating an instrument rack and then adding effects to it, maybe some MIDI effects before it, familiarizing yourself with the functions of a synthesizer, clicking around with the different things you can adjust, and then saving it. Click in the bar up at the top, Control R, rename it something, and then saving it here to make your own custom instruments and things you can play around with in the future. So that's what I would suggest working on now, and diving into more of what makes Ableton Live unique in its own way. Again, this is part of what really contributed to the live part of Ableton in the name, along with the clip view, the idea that you can make all these clips and have them arranged in different ways that you can trigger through them. You can play your way through a set of stuff and have all these different instruments on channels with your knobs mapped to things that you can tweak live as you play different clips. Yeah, that's the big part of the live name of Ableton, was being able to approach it in this way and then translate everything over to the arrangement view, horizontal, recording view. So yeah, that's a way to get started into that end of it. So hope you guys enjoyed. And again, of course, if you have any questions, you can hit me up in the Discord and stuff. And yeah, till next time. Thanks.